One, two, three. Hello, Gary.
Hey, how's it going?
It is going great. How's it going for you?
I'm doing pretty good, actually. I've had a rather busy last couple of weeks, but otherwise everything is just peachy.
Peachy. We like peachy. We can just keep things peachy all the time. That'd be great.
That's right.
Maybe if I moved down to Georgia, it'd be peachy more often.
It could be peachier if you're in Georgia, for all I know.
Yes, they're a land known for peachiness, I guess. I don't know. I have to go there and find out.
Well, there's a story behind that, which I is not my story to tell, but that is a story that is on the internet.
Oh, really? I'll have
Hmm
to I'll have to look that up and see
About
what that is.
why Georgia decided to be the peach state, in addition to them growing a lot of peaches. I mean, we grow a lot of crabgrass and dandelions here in Ohio, but nobody calls us the crabgrass and dandelion state. They do
Well,
call us they do say, of course, that our state flower is the orange beryl, but I think that's every state.
the orange barrel.
Right, the orange construction barrels on the highway.
Oh, right, right. Well, I think we live in we all kind of uniquely live in that. Well, not uniquely, but it's that whole thermal cycling, hot summers, cold winters, and everything in between.
Hmm Absolutely. We had I think 52-degree temperature swing in about 4 hours here a few weeks ago. So
Do they
that
set off
was
the tornado
terribly.
sirens, or do they
Uh,
go the other direction?
they did. We are in tornado country, so there is the occasional tornado that goes through various parts of Ohio, but it's pretty much all the whole state is tornado country.
Yeah, same here. I think in Illinois, I just think it probably see it goes from the is from the west. So I guess it hits us first, then goes to you, or is it the
Hmm
other way around?
No,
I
it's
can't remember.
usually it's coming from the west to the east.
Yeah, yeah. So we're just. I guess if we fall, then you know it's coming.
We'll just catch the news at the wrong time because of the time zone difference. I hate time zones, by the way.
Yeah, there's supposed to be a move to actually do away with time zones and just do it. Just it's that time.
I mean, I'd be perfectly fine with that, and we just adjust to the fact that it's the same time that we're getting up at for work at 3 in the morning. It's
Yeah,
really the same.
exactly.
It won't feel like it, but it will be.
Yeah, and make things a whole lot less confusing for everybody.
Exactly.
But we'll see whether it gets any movement or not. I think people are pretty well entrenched, but this, yeah, the time zones, especially dealing with people in other time zones, and especially with borders. I think with Illinois, we border on Indiana, and so not all of Indiana, follows that. Most of it is a different time zone, except for the ones that are close to Chicago and a few
hmm
little odds and ends. So
hmm
even Indiana's not unified.
I get a lot of people here in Ohio that don't live in Ohio, living in Ohio as I do. I get a lot of folks that assume that I am somehow in Central Time, and I'm like, no, I'm literally 2 states east of Central Time.
Well, to be fair, being in Illinois, I kind of assumed we were in the central of Central Time, but we're
Right.
not.
I make the same assumption. I would just assume the whole state's in Central Time. That would to do otherwise would be stupid, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you look at the map, it isn't really. I'm not sure why Central Time is Central Time, but I guess I don't know
It's
why they
East
named it.
Central Time.
Yes, there you go.
Then there's West Central Time, and then there's Western Time. It doesn't make any sense.
I know somebody came up with it. I'm not sure. Probably some
Farmers.
marketer. I know.
I blame Ben Franklin.
He can be blamed for a lot of things, and that's one more thing we can add to that list.
Indeed.
Uh, so we need to talk about serious stuff.
Absolutely.
Ardwulf Lair. So it started as a blog.
Yeah, in 2007, October of 2007. That's just how I dated, actually. I figure it was actually a few months before that, but I had started it on a site that no longer exists and was so unpopular even at the time that nobody remembers the name of the place. Um, but and then I moved to a different site, and then that went away, or there were technical problems or something like that, and I said, screw it, this WordPress thing looks okay, I'll start with that. So that's the date, is October of
So you're
2007.
pre WordPress. That says a lot.
Yeah, well, I mean, WordPress was around at the time, Live Journal was around at the time, and even Blogspot, I think, was alive was around at the time, although I might be mistaken about that. It might have been several years later that I checked out Blogspot, but the blog's still there. I just don't really blog anymore. I blame Google for this, of course, for killing blogging, but That's not just my opinion.
Yeah, for me, the blogging, yeah, they that, and I think G Plus kind of also create a shockwave as well. But I didn't think about the blogger as well, because those were not really tied together. But I think it was kind of the same time frame. They both. I think blogger took longer to die, or is it did it
It's
die
still
soon?
there. I still get there is actually an Ardwulf's Lair blogger page too, on which there might be one post or something like that. And I pretty much just put it there to stake out the name just in case, which has not been a persistent fear particularly, but no, it's still around. I still get the notifications from the ad money of the zero ad dollars from the blogger blog, actually. Uh, so I mean, nobody reads the thing. I literally post it to it once and say, "Hey, if you really want to hear what I have to say, go over to this other WordPress site." So it hasn't exactly been a big revenue stream, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, I think very few things are. But Substack, I guess that'd be the next thing to jump to. If you're going to jump into one more thing that you're really not going to update, you could do Substack.
That's true. Yeah, I've kind of lost the discipline of daily writing. I mean, for several years, I was reliably doing a windy post a day at least, and there's like over 1 million words on that thing that stretched over, I don't know, 5 to 7 years or something like that. And every once in a while, usually about once, maybe twice a year, I'll put something on the blog. But usually it's a pointer to something else. It's like, hey, we have this video thing, so go check that out.
Well, do you think it's because there was the ecosystem was kind of built up for people commenting, that
Um,
people were following and commenting, that
in
caused you
my
to do it daily?
yeah, I think so. I mean, so the context of the blog was MMORPGs, the video games where you get online and play with thousands or perhaps dozens of people. And that's where the Ardwulf name comes from, actually. That was my character in Vanguard's Saga of Heroes. And on that long forgotten site that's long, even the Internet Archive doesn't remember what the hell it was. Um, that was the idea. I was going to like journal as my character in adventures in this world, and that didn't that conceit didn't last very long. So I ended up just writing about whatever,
So,
and
so what caused it to die out?
the well, that's what I blame Google for, because for killing Google Reader, which dried up a lot of people's easy access to blogging content. There are replacements for it, of course. I still have Feedly installed somewhere, and I still follow a bunch of things. But a lot of that attention then drifted away to various social media platforms as well. So with the rise of social media, that is another factor that probably killed blogging. But there's, there are trickles of it that are still around, right? There are Forbes, for example. When you see something crazy, alternate universe level on your Twitter feed, like, hey, here's an article from Forbes about Traveler, and you think, what? I mean, that's basically they've hired a bunch of bloggers for a nominal fee to write content for them. That's basically their program.
Oh, wow. I never thought about that way, but you're right, because like IO9 and all those places,
Mm-hmm.
you're right.
Mm-hmm. Forbes just happens to have a physical magazine too, which is a completely side thing for them now. I'm sure they make most of their revenue off their web platform.
Yeah, I never really considered it that way. I never even considered that being blogging, but you're right, that's what it is. And in fact, all of that really is, because it's really not, most of the stuff's not like heavily researched type material. It's usually stuff that's cranked out in a fairly short amount of time.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's like a passion thing for the individual person who's writing about current affairs or whatever it is, but they also happen to be a Tunnels and Trolls fan, for example. And they'll occasionally they go, I got to have content by tomorrow, or the kid doesn't eat. So they write about Tunnels and Trolls for 1,500 words, and they get their $2 or whatever it is from Forbes, and they walk away until the next time they have to come up with something, and they pick a nerd topic that we wouldn't or normally expect to see associated with something as rarefied as Forbes, at least what Forbes used to be.
Yeah, and I think in some ways, before I was tending to think it has to do with just, of course, there's the rise of the nerd culture, but but on the other hand, it's like it's cheap content. So as long as
Mhm.
they keep, if Forbes or whoever can just have cheap content continuously flowing, and at least it meets a certain level of, of quality, why wouldn't they just keep pushing that out? Because they're
Mhm.
not limited by paper.
Yeah, and I do think there's some kind of screening process. I don't think you can just like it's not like WordPress where you just create a site and off you go.
Right. Yeah.
There's they vet those folks to some extent. I think. I don't know. I'm not an expert on this.
Yeah, you like to think
And I
there's some
have
level of
investigated it.
editing too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so that's not going to be a side gig then for you. You're not looking for that.
Not I don't have the bandwidth for additional side gigs. Occasionally I'll do something goofy like say to myself, there's a guitar center over there. I'd really love to learn how to play the guitar. And then I'll say to myself, what are you nuts? You don't have the time for that. You barely have the time to put your pants on in the morning.
Yeah. The problem is I hear that siren and I lock in, and I'm down a course I never really intended to.
No, I sympathize. I did that for a long time, and one of the sort of getting older type of decisions I had to make was to decide, well, what hobbies do I really? I mean, I think hobbies are essential to like emotional well-being personally, um, and I think everybody listening to this will probably agree with that. So but just based on the amount of time and the amount of money and the amount of emotional bandwidth I've got, I've only got the space in my head to deal with a couple of these things. So I picked games, and of course, there's the several branches off of games, which include having a YouTube channel about games and doing interviews about games and designing 3D printed storage solutions for games and so it's got a lot of its own fingers. So I mean, I don't even. This is the reason I don't deal with. Although I sometimes make fun of miniatures, but this is the reason I don't do miniatures because I just don't have the time. I don't have the bandwidth. I would go buy $50 worth of miniatures, painting supplies, and miniatures. I got a desk full of miniatures over here. I would paint for 10 minutes, then I would get up and walk away and not touch it again for 3 years.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that. But I mean, looking at the hobby, because just looking at your YouTube channel, I looked at it's like that's a lot of time. Like editing those videos and doing what you're doing, like that's a lot of time. Like I'm looking at yours, like man, you got a really class act going there for the YouTube channel. And
So you haven't watched any of the videos, is what you're saying?
well, I've watched the videos, but I mean, just the thought and the just putting up thumbnails for an episode or whatever it may be, those things just take time,
Mhm.
and just the recording and taking time. And if you do some edit, I do a little bit of minor editing, but it's not, it's definitely not something you just do in 10 minutes. I mean, it's definitely takes a lot of thought and thinking about how that's going to look and what you're going to do and what you're striving for.
It certainly can. I mean, I loathe the editing and am not good at it or efficient at it. So I avoid it where possible, which is one reason, but not the only reason why I do a lot of live stuff now. But even if I do like a very basic video, let's say I want to do an unboxing video, and I it's 10 minutes of footage. So I will then, set it up. So call it 15 minutes to film the thing, set it up, take it down, and then the filming in the middle. Then I have to move it to the computer, run it through editing. And I do edit those videos now because I've got things I've got to do. I have to have a thing at the beginning and a thing at the end. And if I, coughed or said something stupid, I got to cut that out. And that happens all the time. Hilariously, I was wrestling with the cat during an unboxing video. The previous unboxing video actually made it up with cat included, and that actually was a big hit. But because man, was she being adorable during that video. But like I like immediately started doing another one right after that, and I'm trying to get her off the table because I'm trying to film this thing, and I accidentally knocked over a stack of counter trays. The counter trays catapulted all over the room, and I'm sitting here picking up OCS counters for the next 20 minutes. All of it on film. Of course, I'm not on camera, but you can hear because I didn't
Right.
hit stop. Like, God damn this. So it was, I'll probably put that in a blooper reel at some point. So obviously that that had to be severely manhandled in editing. We had a lot to fix in post.
Yeah, I mean, because I think I do probably less editing than you. I just normally just trim off the beginning and the end. I used to sometimes get like a little bumper. I don't put something at the beginning of the video or at the end of the video, but still I usually take it, run it through, because I do Zoom, but I run it through uh, iMovie and convert it. And then you have to upload to YouTube and wait for it to do its conversion. And then the same thing with GarageBand. And it just even that just takes time, a lot of time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in an extreme case where I might have something like an instructional video, which I don't do very many of, and this is why. I might have what comes out at the end of the process is something like a 12-minute video. Here's how to, do the action phase in Paths of Glory. Now, this is an actual example with actual numbers. That turned into, between setting up the pieces and doing all the filming and getting like 75 different clips or whatever it was, that turned into about an hour and a half of footage. Okay. It took me about 20 hours to edit it together into a 12-minute video. So I mean, I am positive that somebody that knows what they're doing, that has the right software and knows how to use it, could probably do that in far less time. But minimally, I got to sit there for as long as the video is, right? So it isn't zero time. I try to keep it to a minimum, but a minimum is, I anticipate that you'll eventually see the need for more editing. I used to do exactly that thing. Chop off the beginning at an appropriate point, chop off the end at an appropriate point, upload it. That was it. I don't do that anymore.
Yeah, I think it would if it's just that I don't know why I decided to do a weekly a podcast, but that definitely sucks up a bunch of time. But I think if I were to spend too much time, I probably lose interest. So I don't know.
I have managed to not. Not that I don't have, down weeks and up weeks, but I've managed to do even the 2-hour Monday live stream, which originally just started off as well, hell, I got nothing to do tonight. Let's sit here and clip counters and BS for I didn't even decide it was going to be 2 hours. It's just how long it worked. And I'm like, hey, there's like 35 people watching this thing. That's weird. So the next week I did it again, and it was like 39 people watching. And the next week I did it again, it's like 41 people watching. And I'm like, I don't know why people are watching me. This is bizarre. I'm sitting here with a counter cutting tool, clipping counters, and just filling the air with BS. But I will admit to a talent to putting out a continuous stream of BS for 2 hours. That I can do.
Well, now that you're saying that, because my daughter enjoys the what is that called, where it's people listening to like sounds, like people cutting things. It's
like the MSR.
Yeah, yeah. Was it called
MSR?
MSR, yeah. So maybe it's kind of like an MSR, like just hearing somebody talking in the background, and just there must be something relaxing about it to people, maybe.
Oh, well, I do hear that a lot. I mean, I've been getting requests lately, especially to put that show out in a podcast format, actually, because people tell me, yeah, I just put it on my phone, put headphones on, go cut the grass or do laundry or whatever. So, I mean, nobody wants to look at me. I mean, they're not all crazy.
Well, I do think that, because mine is pretty long compared to most podcasts, but there's people that really enjoy the long form and stated that. So I think you probably get more people with shorter podcasts, but there are definitely people out there that enjoy the longer as well.
Yeah, you're about average in the group of podcasts I listen to, actually. But almost all of those are all gaming or history podcasts. So mostly history podcasts.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about that. I think most of the gaming is, yeah, I would say you're probably right. Yeah. It's probably just depending, and it's probably it's kind of interesting. I kind of wonder if it's demographically by age.
Possible.
I wonder if younger people like shorter amount of content.
Maybe that would be the stereotype. I wouldn't assume that that's true without actual corroboration.
Well, I'm not saying it is. I just kind of wonder, because I think, like TikTok and things like that definitely aim more to younger. I'm not saying. I would say I think if I'm listening to a actual podcast, I probably will listen. I really don't care so much about time. Anything over 2 hours is usually annoying. But I would say with YouTube, I tend to not watch anything on YouTube that's long.
So that's demographically very common on YouTube, actually.
Yeah.
I'm breaking the rule on that. I think average view time on YouTube is like 2.5 minutes or something like that for most content.
Well, I feel good because on my long videos, I'm getting an average of like 8 minutes.
Right. Yeah. And that was another thing that was like, I started looking at the numbers. It's like, I've got an average of 38 minutes here. People hanging around, listen to me for 38 minutes. Now, I don't know how well YouTube is monitoring that as far as like, because if there's a long video, particularly something like I can listen to while driving or something like that, I'll get out, stop the video, get out of the car, go shop or whatever, get back in the car, resume where I left off, because YouTube will do that. Does that count as 2 views? Do they like stack that together into one extended viewing period? I think it does count as 2 views, but they don't stack it together in one extended viewing period. So that's going to hurt people right there, because people, fiddle with their phones when they're just waiting in line or whatever, and then they're at the pharmacy register and it's time to talk to the person.
I think if I had more time, I probably would actually maybe do, a couple different types of podcasts. Maybe one would be aimed at the YouTube side and maybe smaller, and then
In your copious free time.
In my copious free time, yes. If I were to clone myself, if I decide not to get into publishing RPGs, I probably would have all that time. But I chose poorly as far as podcasting goes.
It's going to happen. People got to make decisions. I made decisions. I recognize that I made decisions. I am emphatically not criticizing other people for having made different decisions to get into stuff that I made a decision I just didn't have the time for.
Well, I realize all decisions really ultimately, I think, or maybe not all, but pretty much, but a lot of them are just irrational and they really don't make much sense. But you just
maybe not.
But you do it because you just feel the need to do it.
It's not necessarily that it's rational. That's not the important part of it. The important part of it is you made the decision. You decided one way or the other.
You're right.
Did you have to be Mr. Spock about it? I mean, maybe not. But the important thing is that at some point you got to make the call and decide what you're going to spend your time on, right?
Right. Rather than spend your time dithering.
Right. Or watching TikTok all day, right? This is better than that.
I don't know that it is. I think give me another decade, I'll come back with you, Gary.
I will say this about TikTok. I feel like TikTok's algorithm is actually better tuned to deliver content that I will watch than any of the shorts, like the YouTube shorts or the Facebook shorts or whatever they're called on Facebook, where I get just like completely random stuff. TikTok actually, after a little bit of practice, kind of figured out what I want to see and what I'll flip past. I think TikTok's a little better at that than the other similar platforms.
The problem I had is starting out with TikTok, the stuff it was showing me was stuff like, I shouldn't be seeing this. Like young girls shaking things. I'm like, this is not where I want to be. And I don't know that I want to spend my time viewing this stuff, trying to teach it to get me to get me out of it. That was the problem. It's like, why am I seeing this?
Yeah, I didn't really see that. I didn't really see a lot of like TNA stuff. Let me put it that way. Maybe it identified me for my demographic and realized that this old person probably doesn't have the energy for that kind of stuff.
It's like it should have done me either. I don't know why. Like, why is there, this 16-year-old kid doing this? It's like, this should not be in the front page unless you should have to get to there at a certain point, not like immediately. Like I just don't even want to be seen with this stuff. It's just like danger.
So, I can appreciate that.
Yes, just my wife, what are you doing? Like, I just opened up TikTok.
That's not a conversation you really want to have.
No, it just makes it not worth it. But now they filter. But TikTok comes through Facebook, is it Facebook? No, it's Reels, isn't it? Sorry.
Yeah, Instagram Reels is what Facebook's using. I don't know if they're Facebook Reels or Instagram Reels or whatever. I don't know. I'm not one of the with it kids.
I do enjoy them, except the problem is if I make the mistake out of curiosity to watch one thing, then that's what they all become.
Right.
Like Steven Seagal being, how he does a stupid jujitsu nonsense, and And then
The no faster way to get me to swipe away than to put Steven Seagal on the phone.
they did that where, you know what I'm talking about, where he does these martial art moves and everybody's faking it like he's a master. And also because it's absurd when he does this. Like people are faking like getting knocked down, and it's just ridiculous when he does these demonstrations.
Yeah, Bruce Lee used to actually beat those people up.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, authenticity. It's all about authenticity.
But when Steven does it, it's like it's stupid. But I made the mistake of watching it once, and all of a sudden they're all doing that. It's like, stop. I don't like Steven Seagal. It was fine once, but
it really only works due to his acting talent.
You know, it's just it's pretty amazing. You know, now I think about it, it's kind of amazing. Maybe that's where it's ended. His acting talent brought him to the apex of Instagram and TikTok.
That could be. That could be.
Yeah. So how long have you been doing the YouTube?
I think I started the channel in 2007 or maybe 2009, and I was like doing occasional videos on MMORPGs. And I didn't delete any of this stuff. So if you like go back in an early history of the channel, which is don't do that because it's a huge pain in the ass because there's like 1,200 videos now, and you'd have to scroll, load, literally all day. So don't do that. But if you look at the first 100 video, maybe 50 videos or so, it's all like video game and MMORPG stuff. It's probably about 150 because I did like complete playthrough let's play series of a couple of things. And that's a lot of content when you got like 75 Dragon Age videos, for example. And no, the view counts on those even to this day are like 2. So literally nobody watched those. But as I got back into wargaming, which is we're probably talking about 2012, 2013, I started doing wargaming videos. And the first one is actually one that nobody's seen because it's not on that channel. It's on my personal channel. And after I decided I was going to like start doing this, I just put it on the channel that people were watching, you know, both of them. And it was just like, hey, here's some wargame counters. Here's what all these numbers mean on these wargame counters. It's like a 2-minute video. Then I did some videos that took off really well. Some like walkthrough videos of a couple of games and a playthrough or two, a short playthrough or two of like a solitaire game, The Hunters in this case. And those videos have racked up many thousands of views at this point. And that's probably, we're talking like 2014. I think that's approximately correct. I could be wrong about any of these times, but and since then the channel has been almost exclusively and it absolutely exclusively for about the last 4 or 5 years dedicated to tabletop gaming. I actually started a separate channel for digital games that, you know, just like my history with digital games, nobody watches. So, and to be fair, I don't do much content for it because just I don't have the time, right? I'm struggling to since we moved into this house in August, I have spent about 4 hours playing video games. And I know that exact number because that was all in the last 2 weeks.
So I guess the question is, why the video games? Like, what was the trigger for that you stopped playing?
I don't know that I stopped, but it was more of the same type of calculus. It was like, okay, well, one of the reasons that was motivating me to play video games was I was really wanted to do historical games, and I didn't have the connections to have people to play those with. As I gradually accumulated those connections, by the way, none of which originally materialized because I was blogging or had a channel. But as that started to actually happen, there was less need for me to spend time playing Crusader Kings or you know, whatever it was. So I never abandoned that stuff. And even as recently as about 2 or 3 years ago, I was still playing like a lot of Elder Scrolls Online. Was reliably putting in 5 hours a week or maybe 7 hours a week or something like that.
I found for me that the problem I started having, I kind of been away for a while. I would go back, but like I started playing XCOM when it came out. I just realized that they got the system down that it will pull me in for hours and hours and hours. And I'm like, Wow. It's like that's some potent magic there. I better stay away from that. I will not get anything done if the way they run these games. They know how to really keep people playing.
Now, I have had that experience too in the last few years, but for me, that's all I don't want to use the word historically here, but like back in the day, I used to sink countless hours of late night Civilization 2, right? And I tend not to like those games nearly as much now, where I've been guilty of the what do you mean it's 3 a.m. Has been with open world survival games, actually, which if they are thematically appealing to me, I can spend a lot of time into, and just like just building stuff, right? That to me is, you know, it, to me that's a huge part of the appeal. I mean, it's fun. It's fun to spend time killing crocodiles and stuff in Conan Exiles, but I also had this elaborate palace, right by the river with all the crocodiles. So it's easy to just watch the hours vanish with that kind of thing,
Well, it's
particularly
something
in.
yeah, I don't really understand, but that is something that has, I think, been developing is, not only the building of stuff, but now they even were just doing fun, nice things that aren't really, like I can't remember what they call it. They're really nice games where you go talk to a person and you help somebody out and you do a little job and that seems to be, I guess, tying into something else that people find intriguing or interesting.
So this ties into the sort of broadening of the appeal of games in general, because this is the kind of stuff my wife plays. Actually, my wife also streams. Um, less, she puts less time in it than I do. Let me put it that way. But the games she likes to play are games like The Sims or Diner Dash. What I forget what it's called, but basically you're not even like running the restaurant. It's not a restaurant simulator. You just have you're like the kitchen staff, and you've got to like click on these things to put the ham and eggs together because somebody just ordered ham and eggs, and then you've got to like bust the tables after they're done, and it seems mundane compared to the stuff I play, or maybe you play, or maybe the listeners play. And yet, there's like this whole greater gamosphere of folks playing stuff like this that is like little less disconnected from their everyday lives than me playing a game about Napoleon for 6
Right.
days, 12 hours a day.
I think for me, what's interesting is doing mundane things that are actually mimicking what people do in real life.
Mm-hmm.
Seems I have a hard time, you know, people want to do it. It's fine. I have a hard time, like my mind, like being able to, understand that space. But
Papers and
people,
paychecks.
yeah,
So it's I don't even think it's that weird anymore. I mean, and it does mean that there's a lot of people that consider themselves gamers that and I'm not going to argue with them, that would never consider playing any of the stuff that I would want to play. And I got to spend the time on the stuff I want to do too, right? So I'm not going to go play that thing where I run the diner. But you know, if they're having fun with it, hey, I'm not going to yell at them about
oh,
it.
I agree. I just think what's interesting is how, like, it's like when something comes out, like, you can go back to say like say D&D when it first came out. It's like there's a very rigid way of thinking about what a game is, what this is, and it's taken years and decades for it to expand out to understand that it's much broader. And same thing with video games. It's like, you know, I never would have guessed these things would be appealing, but they are appealing to people and they
Mhm.
enjoy it. And it's nothing wrong, but it's just interesting how things have gone well beyond bounds that I would have thought it could exist.
We're getting into territory that I might have to ask you to redact the podcast over if I say too much. So I'll just blandly agree and let's move
Okay.
along.
All righty.
Because
And so,
our discussions, will say, over what is this kind of game and what is that kind of game and why this game is this kind of game and this other game is that kind of game, I find extraordinarily tiresome, and yet they have consumed entirely too much of my last 2 weeks. So
it is funny how sometimes people can get kind of irate about things that are just kind of in the end, it's just like, why are you people wanting to stir things up over over this. People want to have fun. Just let them have fun.
Well, I won't. I mean, for most people, the output of that conversation is simply unimportant, right? And this was my position. I'm like, this question bores me. We've been going over this since 1974. Nobody has ever come up with a resolution that has satisfied a single other person. Let's just drop this to subject.
Right. And the problem is, it's not like, well, is this prog rock, or is this, post punk? It's not even this kind of theoretical. It's like people getting very upset.
Oh, you could never mistake prog rock for post punk. Let me say that. But there are narrow avenues in which this is a relevant question to ask. But generally, I find it to be an unproductive and unentertaining conversation.
Yeah.
I had a I don't want to say argument, but I had let's say strongly disagreed with somebody on Twitter who was trying to make the point that the current crop of journaling RPGs are not role-playing games, that they're like a completely different activity. And I'm like, oh, okay, but I don't care. So is that important? Is what value is that statement bringing to the conversation, right? And I think too often we lose track of that question: is what am I getting out of the conversation by, let's say I convince you that Twilight Struggle is a war game. Great. What have we gained from that? Other than we have spent 40 minutes on this pedantic argument.
Right. I think that the idea is sometimes people want to push something outside of being part of something more than saying, what's a taxonomy that we can create that incorporates this in a way that we can agree upon.
That's a very human thing to want to do, that the taxonomic aspect of this, right? We want to put things in categories. We want to categorize things. And as we move along in society, those bins become narrower and narrower and narrower, right? I've had made this case in a number of places relatively recently. We're also getting into dangerous territory here for me, so I got to be careful. But there was a long time after the introduction of RPGs in 1974 where RPGs were not considered a category that was meaningfully distinct from war games in any way. And that held true until really like the early 80s, 80, 81, 82 is when people started to, I mean, it's not like the term wasn't around, but it was considered a branch of war games, just like Napoleonic war games might be. Oh, he's an American Civil War player and he's a role-playing war gamer. So these things evolve. At one point, science fiction and fantasy were not considered distinct genres, right? They were weird fiction. There were magazines that were dedicated to weird fiction, and we look at the names of the people that wrote for those magazines. We'll see there's a science fiction person, and here's a horror person, and we've got all these little subcategories that now have grown into their own highly populated individual categories.
Yeah, what's kind of interesting too is, in a sense, that it, as it grew into those categories, then it became much more rigid.
In a lot of ways, yeah. There's value in the category, but there's also value in ignoring or willing yourself not to see the walls between the categories, because then you might see something that is otherwise invisible to you if you are confined to this box. That is, I am a war gamer, so that game doesn't have hexagons on the map. That's not a war game. I won't play that. It's like serious conversations that actual allegedly grown adults have. Okay, but are there other things you might like or be able to bring into your space that you can't see because they are currently outside your space? And it's nice that we are seeing plenty of those artificially constructed, but meaningful to us, barriers being broken down or at least seen through some of the time.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting on how everything we have is really a synthesis of things that have gone before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the inability to look around and see other things that you can synthesize into whatever it is you're doing, it does impoverish you, I guess. To me, it can impoverish you for the future. It's like, who knows what's going to come? Yeah, maybe this thing that's here it really isn't this or really isn't that, or maybe it's doing something really weird that doesn't fit, but who knows what could be learned from that will get
Hmm.
incorporated to something else that'll be awesome.
Hmm. Hmm. A question that I'm currently struggling with. So you've probably heard of Europa Universalis, the computer game, and there's a board game version of it out now. And the question I'm wrestling with, myself too, not just in conversations with other people, is this what I'd consider a war game? Right? Is something like Eclipse a war game? Doesn't have war game. It doesn't kind of have the kind of rules that we normally associate with those kind of games. Um, but it does what those kind of games do, right? It has a different emphasis than a Panzer Blitz would, but so what, right? There's still plenty of those examples. So, I mean, I would just encourage folks to try to see beyond the boundaries of this narrow category, and then try to think about what the semantic value of the category has to them. And just that thought process ought to be illuminating for some people. And it was for me. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, and I think the thing too is, and I think there are a lot of people who enjoy a thing and they just want to keep enjoying it, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No,
No, but it's just that
but
it's just
their thing's not going away.
yeah, I know that's just it. Even though with D&D, it's like people losing their minds about Wizards of the Coast. Like, who cares what Wizards of the Coast does? It's like you get
What, do you not have enough D&D stuff? Okay, D&D person, do you like not have enough D&D stuff? Is there not enough D&D stuff coming out from a million other
yeah,
publishers this year?
like,
Play D&D. Who cares? There's literally 50 in print right now that you could go buy, games that don't say Dungeons and Dragons on the cover, but are D&D in
yes.
every meaningful way, except possibly they hire the old D&D artists to do new cover art to put on their not D&D game.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I thought things would get better as we got older, but we are getting to the point of, as older we get, I guess that as a culture we do find ourselves still, getting crotchety and kids get off our lawn kind of attitude, which is kind of sad. Oh, you're
I have
there you
no
go.
idea how that happened. I do feel like I have grown up in that regard, but that is not to say that I have not become increasingly crotchety as I've got older, because that's totally a thing.
Yeah, I've become increasingly annoyed at middle-aged men being angry about things.
I don't have the energy or the time to be mad at everything. I do not have the
Yeah.
time or the energy or the bandwidth to embark on every single personal crusade among, people who
Yeah.
have been wronged.
Yes.
So I'm sorry for the people who have been wronged, but I have to be selective about which wronged people I actually have the time to engage with.
Well, and I think what's interesting is behind the being wrong. And you did say wrong; it is feeling wronged, but by being wronged, it means you're owed. And it's like what is, what does Watsy owe me, or what is, whoever owe me? They don't owe me anything.
Exactly.
It's like,
Exactly. Maybe they're owed something by somebody, but it ain't me. So
it's called, yeah, they just owe shareholders. But anyhow, yeah, it's and I think it's so for war game. I'm not really tied into war game. I know for role playing games, it's just like things are just exploding. Like you mentioned, journaling. I've not done any of it, and glad it's out there. I wish I would. I wish I was wired for that. But it's just amazing, all these young kids doing all these crazy things, and they're bringing all sorts of vitality. For the wargaming, is there anything similar to that, or what's like the state of the health for wargaming?
people have been asked, this is true of RPGs too, right? Like D&D comes out in 1974, and by 1975, people are complaining that it's dying. People have been saying this about war games in print that I'm aware of since at least 1972. And as I'm now of an age where I can comfortably say, you know what, I don't care. The kind of wargaming I like is going to outlive me, and I can't really ask for anything more than that. And I'm actually by disposition a real conservative wargamer. Like I like the old hex and counter stuff. Um, the not Panzerblitz specifically, but games along with cardboard chits and hex maps,
Yeah.
and I'll play other stuff, but I do play a fair amount of other stuff, but that's my preference. Big, long, groggy, mostly pretty complicated games. And that's a scene that even though it's what I like, and this is the case with RPGs too, it can be seen to be more omnipresent than it actually is in the community, right? It seems to outsize other stuff, right? People still say to this day, people who ought to know better say, "Oh, SPI was, they did." SPI is a company that was around. They began in 1968 or 69, and they went away in early 1982 when they were absorbed by TSR.
Yeah, that was a nice move.
Yeah, well, everybody agrees that's a douche move. There is no controversy about that. But everybody's not everybody, but there are still people, again, folks who should know, say, "Oh, their games were super complicated." I mean, look at Campaign for North Africa and War Between the States and Air War and City Fight. And I'm like, yeah, but look at Blue and the Gray Quad. It's got like 4 pages of rules. They did just as many. They were all over the place, and this is analogous to RPGs, right? You'll hear a lot of the time people need simpler games. Man, the simpler games are out there. They might not be sucking all the air out of the room like D&D is, but they're out there. They've always been out there. They're out there with war games now. They're out there with RPGs now. And to a certain extent, people do kind of like complexity, don't they? Because all the really popular games in both war games and RPGs tend toward the complicated.
Yes.
D&D 5 is one of the simpler ones, really, and it's fairly complicated. I mean, if I handed a wargamer 3 huge 200+ page hardcovers, they'd think I was an alien. I mean, this is a community that's, the stereotype is that there's all these super old groggy dudes who are playing these super complicated games with tables and charts and 17 roll, blah, 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 blah. And, you hand them an RPG. I had him the Hero Systems 6th edition in 2 500+ page hardcovers. They'll look at me like I've grown a 4th head. So all the really popular RPGs were kind of complicated.
Well, even 5th edition is fairly complicated. D&D.
By a lot of by my personal standard, no, I don't think it's about a medium.
But I mean, to hand it to a new person who's never played, to look through it, it's very complicated.
But it is. But there's also a trick by which to start playing D&D. You don't actually need to know anything, because you just do what the guy says, the DM says for 10 minutes while you're making the character, and then you do what the DM says when they ask you to make a roll, and gradually you'll pick it up. This is not generally true of war games, by the way. You generally have to have some comprehensive knowledge of the rules at some level to even start. But for an RPG, assuming the game master is not a bozo, you don't really need to know very much, especially if it's a game like D&D where you're really not making a lot of decisions during character creation. This is less true now than it used to be, where you used to literally pick a race, pick a class, roll your skills in order, and write some stuff down and buy equipment, and that was it. Or in Classic Traveler, where there's the only decision you make really is to pick a service to try to get into, and possibly decide where the numbers that you rolled go on the character sheet. Although the Classic Traveler rulebook is very interestingly unspecific about that. It does not tell you either way. I believe that was intentional, actually. It doesn't tell you whether to put them in order or put them where you want. I believe that to have been intentional.
It might be. It may not really matter to them.
Maybe, but it was a question. The first time people played that, and that did get some play testing. That's a question I would have asked. And I suspect that Mark's answer at the time was probably, well, how do you want to do it? Let the table decide. Now, so the rule book doesn't say, and there's not a lot of dead space to expound upon, do what you want in those original little black books.
And maybe he found out just the least interesting thing to have in his rule book.
Maybe.
That is kind of interesting because really, I wonder if most people played D&D, and there was definitely, I think everything did probably carried over. Well, I wonder if a lot of stuff just kind of carried over there by through osmosis, but maybe not.
Maybe that's plausible to me. I mean, if you look at other really popular RPG systems that you see get played a lot, um, almost none of them are like really low on the complexity ladder, and that's true of war games too. Games that really get played a lot. There's like a shared lineage between where we're cousins, right? Between um, RPGs and war games, and I get to be the inbred crotchety old uncle, I suppose, is what that means, because I do both. And I'm in, believe it or not, I'm in 2 RPG campaigns right now, which is the first time that's happened in a long time. And that's just time. I haven't had the time.
Yeah, I'm jealous. It's hard.
I was extremely lucky. Old buddy of mine back from the old days, like the old days, reached out to me about a year ago and said, "Hey, I want to run Call of Cthulhu." And I started asking questions about it. He's going to run like At the Mountains of Madness. I'm like, "Oh, that sounds awesome. There's no way I have the time to do this. I'm sorry." And he came to me about a month ago with another pitch for Shadowrun. And when he told me the time, I'm like, yes, because it's the exact 2-hour slot that my wife is streaming during.
Ah,
So I'm like, hey, I'm sitting in front of the computer here anyway. Yeah, let's do it. I'm up for that. Sounds great. So I lucked out in that, and it's like half old people that I knew back in the day, and half other people that they have met since then. So
you're playing a more modern version, or you're playing an old version of Shadowrun?
we're actually using a D20 modern hack of Shadowrun.
It's it's probably more sensible.
Maybe Shadowrun, another very popular game, really rather complicated.
Yeah,
All the way back to the original edition, really, it was fairly complicated.
Yeah, it is, and I don't know. I mean, people love it, and I don't know if it's a means of. I wonder if it's a means of being able to sell more and more. Maybe not. Maybe it's not a capitalistic decision that they can use to do more books and splat books and variations. But maybe that has nothing to do with it. I don't know.
Actually don't think it does, at least in this particular example, because I think the reason why Shadowrun is complicated is because Shadowrun's got a lot of balls in the air, man. You got, the sort of the baseline human stuff. You've got all the modern stuff. You've got the cyberpunk stuff. You've got the magic stuff. You've got the weird fantasy races stuff. You got dragons flying around. I mean, there's like a lot that system has to model. So I can appreciate why it is complicated, even with that. While that is not a value judgment on whether that complexity is good or not in this particular example.
Yeah, I think it could be trimmed a bit, but I still think it worked. When I played, I haven't played that often. I played once, and it was like maybe a couple years ago, and I played a face, and you could successfully play it. It's one of the only games I've ever known. You could actually be a guy that's non-combat and actually influence the game and be able to do things. Like I was just getting away with just bribing people the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Here's some money. I got a good roll. I got a few things here. Okay.
Here's some money. Shut up. Go away.
Yeah. Why don't you work for me now? Oh, okay.
This guy gives me money. I like him. I mean, I'd like people that give me money normally. I assume the check's not going to bounce, by the way.
Well, we'll see. Yeah. Just wait a while. Wait a minute.
We'll see.
Yeah, but I think what you're bringing up too, and going back to the wargaming, and I think what wargaming has going for it, that maybe in some ways is better than with RPGs, is that the rules are easier, I think, to put onto a computer. And it's probably easier to then play either by yourself online through an AI or with other people. So that's pretty. I imagine it's pretty straightforward for a lot of those board games is to play with other people online.
So yes and no. There is an enormous amount of online play occurring nowadays, but that is often through platforms that we might think of as virtual tabletops for board games, right? Things like Tabletop Simulator and Vassal and Rally the Troops and a variety of other platforms. In our sort of traditional war game space, Vassal is the way to go, I think. But certainly I've fooled with Tabletop Simulator and a couple of the other ones as well. But those are not AI assisted or even AI rules enforced things, right?
Right.
It's like it's basically a whiteboard that just happens to have that somebody loaded up with the board and pieces to this thing, right? And maybe they'll do some additional customization, like if you have a fatigue marker that you can put on units or whatever. The promise that computers were going to revolutionize war games is a promise that people were talking about as early as the late 70s. I've got a book by the legendary designer and president of SPI, James Dunnigan, that was written in the early 80s that says this is like, hey, this is all going to be replaced by computer war games. And something rather remarkable, well, a number of remarkable things happened, but the remarkable thing I'm thinking of is that didn't actually happen. There's certainly a lot of strategy type games, some of which have historical themes, but a lot of that really sophisticated modeling of historical situations that we thought computers were going to be really great at has proved to be commercially unviable for publishers of those kinds of games. There are some exceptions, but generally one picks up a war, quote unquote, war game that looks like a board war game on Steam or whatever, and generally the AI is crap. The model is not any more sophisticated than Panzerblitz had, and the AI difficulty is entirely done by cheating. So that's been a big failure in my opinion. There are exceptions, but that's generally been my experience that basically on almost all levels, very few computer war games where it's a video game, right? Where you're sitting in front of it, you got an AI opponent or whatever.
Yeah.
In very few cases has that felt as satisfying, either from the social standpoint, where it's obvious that it's not going to be satisfying, or from the simulation standpoint and the sort of exploration of history standpoint. Very few of those have felt very satisfying to me. And I could name bad ones, but I'd like to forget them. So,
but I guess the ones that are just maybe, but there are companies that put out their games where the rules are there, just two people are going online and playing against each other, right?
that's totally happening. That happens a lot.
Yeah.
So if I want to play, I'll use GMT's White Battle of White Plains, and I'm making an assumption that there's already a module for it. But if there isn't, there will be in a couple of weeks. So GMT puts out a new game, the Battle of White Plains, part of the Battles of the American Revolution system, and I picked it up and it looks good to me, or I downloaded the rules or whatever, and kind of the honor system says that somebody that's playing got the game. So I have the Vassal engine installed, which is basically this sort of Java client that sits on my computer, and I go out to the Vassal site and I download a module that somebody, maybe a fan or maybe sort of an unofficially employed fan, if you know what I'm saying, that works with that publisher, has created this module. And the module is this Java package that contains all the images from the game, sometimes not all, but usually at least some of the charts and tables and all that stuff. The rules aren't in there. Very, very seldom does somebody dump the rules into the Vassal module. And the exact analogous situation exists with Tabletop Simulator and the other platforms too, right? They just look different. So I download the module. The other person that I want to play with downloads the module. We get together on Skype or Discord or whatever it is. We talk through it, and I move the pieces, and he can see what I'm moving, and he moves the pieces, and I can see what he's moving, and we just step through the game. And it's a completely manual process.
Wow.
That is enabled on the internet because we have like I said, it's kind of like a virtual whiteboard where there's a map, and I've got all the individual pieces that I can move. And it's up to us to enforce the rules of the game. So they're because the modules are by individual game, and some of them are literally people get paid to make them, the designer or the publisher, whoever pays somebody to make a module, and then presumably it's very professional and there's some automation and stuff like that. A lot of times it's literally just a map and the counters, and you deal with everything else yourself. So there's a pretty wide, this is absolutely the case with Tabletop Simulator as well. there's a pretty wide variety of like levels of red meat in in the modules, right? Some games have very skeletal modules, other games have elaborate automation and stuff like that. Or you'll be able to like right click on something and say show zones of control, and you'll see the zones of
Right.
control in the surrounding hexes, for example, that kind of stuff.
I would have. I'm surprised. I guess I would have thought there would be like a company, they'd pay a subscription and you'd buy these modules and then you could play online with people, and it would have the rules built in.
We are seeing that, but we've seen that in a much more limited way than folks have otherwise predicted. So, and part of the reason is just economic, right? It is expensive to develop a platform for these things.
Right.
So,
Right.
I assume that folks at Lock and Load Publishing are paying developers to design Lock and Load Tactical Digital, but you can go to Steam and buy Lock and Load Tactical Digital, which is a very good and very authentic representation of their Lock and Load Tactical board war game, which is World War. It's modern too, but I've only played the World War II stuff. And then you go and buy that, and it's cheap, right? But you get like 4 scenarios with it, and then if you want more, you buy more scenarios as DLC. So that is happening, but just the economics of it, the realities of the economics for most publishers in the wargaming space have made it difficult to get the amount of money rolling to get the development happening on any serious level. There have been other attempts at it. There are a number of digital adaptations of the more popular GMT games like Twilight Struggle. On my PC right now is Twilight Struggle and Labyrinth. And there's a couple other ones out as well. And they got a deal with Playdeck. At one point, Decision Games had a deal with somebody that produced nothing, as far as I'm aware. And there have been other efforts along those lines as well. But that prediction, which is a completely logical thing to extrapolate, turns out not to have been true for a variety of reasons. It has not come to pass to
well,
the
thing
extent
too
most predicted.
is supporting something, because I thought, even the little stuff that I've done, and it's, I get into more complicated stuff. There are a number of companies like Foundry and Roll20 you can put stuff out for, but it's like, but then it takes time to put it in a format that it can use. But then the other thing is like supporting it. Like, what happens if they update something? You got to change. I mean,
yeah,
it's like, even your initial time investment or outlay, you're still on the hook for all these people that bought it and then supporting this. And you're not a software company. They're a war game company. It's like, it's like,
or an RPG company,
or an
right?
RPG company.
How many RPG companies can afford to partner with a software developer to
Yeah.
develop a digital platform, or even tools for an existing digital platform? The number that we're thinking of is probably less than the 5 fingers on my hand.
Right. Otherwise, it would be happening, because economics tells us it would be happening.
Right.
If it's not happening, it's not because nobody thought of it.
Yeah, and you know what? We are in a hobby. In both cases, we are in hobbies that have a large number of enthusiastic, passionate, and often technically skilled volunteers. Right. So a lot of stuff happens on a volunteer basis, but man, it's way slower because you're not paying a developer $75 an hour to do it.
And that's what's going on with Foundry. A lot of the rule sets they're unofficial, but they're usually okayed by the actual game companies. But it takes you're right, it takes a long time for those to get developed. And I would imagine in some ways it's probably, it could be less complicated in some ways to put role-playing content in than it is maybe for even a simpler war game. Maybe maybe the interactions are different in a way maybe it would be more difficult to do a war game than a lot of RPGs. I don't know.
That's an interesting question. I think it to some extent yes, to some extent no. And part of that is the central assumption of almost all role-playing games, which is that there's a character at the middle of it, and the character has a character sheet. And on that character sheet, there are things. And at some level, the virtual tabletop for RPGs has to be able to manage that, right? There may be a greater or lesser degree of automation, but at minimum, you need a character sheet that's kind of built into the game. For anybody that struggled with the generic character sheet in Roll20, for example, I'm sorry that the game you love is not supported by Roll20. By the way, the GURPS game that I'm in, which is the other game that I'm in, which has been rolling for a few weeks now, is using the Foundry, actually. And I like it so far. I found Roll20, I found um, Fantasy Grounds to be expensive and opaque, but powerful. I found Roll20 to be cheap, but hot garbage. And I'm finding the Foundry so far to be a more comfortable middle ground between those two things.
Yeah, and I've not really ran a whole lot. The little bit I have, it's worked out pretty well, and it seems like it's a much more seems more intuitive than Roll20 ever was.
Yeah. I had so one of the things that I did was I like moved away to go back to school, right? And this is like in 2010, so this is not recent, but in the meantime, I had to leave. I left my gaming buddies up there, and at one point we tried to like loop me back into their campaign, which I was like super excited about because it was a traveler campaign, and they did it through Roll20 run up there. They were all live in a room with Roll20 running on a laptop, and I was sitting here in 120 miles away. In through Roll20, and it was a terrible, miserable experience from a technical standpoint. It was like the voice, like they were using the voice because the electrical engineer whose laptop it is couldn't figure out how to get Discord to work. So we had to use Roll20, terrible quality. We'd lose the connection all the time. Video quality was tiny little thumbnail sized photos. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't see the people. I mean, part of what you're doing in an RPG is interpreting the visual cues of the body language and verbal intonation and all that stuff of the people at the table with you. And I got exactly zero of that from doing it on Roll20. There's definitely, like, as you'll know, there's kind of a different table etiquette running an RPG online. It's really important that only one person's talking at a time,
Right.
for example. Wherein in a room that people are physically in, I can speak in a low voice to the person next to me and not disrupt everybody's experience. On a microphone, either nobody's going to hear you or everybody's going to hear you, and everybody's talking at once and nobody can understand a thing that's being said.
Yeah, you're right. It does. I mean, the advantage is it obviously allows people to connect from far away, but it does make it difficult for certain games, especially when not everybody's involved at the same time with what's going on.
I'll tell you a game that would be somebody's probably made it work, but I'll tell you a game that would be a total failure played online. Captain Sonar. Because the whole conceit of the game and why it is awesome is because all of the participants, the entire time they are playing, are all yelling at maximum volume. And that totally wouldn't work online.
So is it kind of like Pit?
Pit is like that too, actually. But so it's like this sort of live, real-time, head-to-head submarine game where you've got like two submarine crews and nobody knows where the other submarine is. So you got to figure it out, and you've got like different roles. I actually call it the party game for wargamers, actually. It accommodates like 8 people, and each person has a job. There's like the captain and the torpedo person and the radio person and the sonar person. And they're all talking. And, meanwhile, like 2 feet away, the other crew's talking too. So, and everybody's talking. It's super loud. It's an amazing experience. Totally wouldn't work online.
So you have 2 different groups against each other. Is that what you're
Yes.
saying? And you're all in the same room, and it's a cacophony and it's chaos, which probably does kind of simulate like the stress of
yes. It's an incredibly high intensity experience. It's not a 10-hour game for obvious reasons. They usually last like half an hour, 40 minutes maybe. But it's super high intensity. You feel like a dish rag when you're done. But man, it was fun.
That does sound very interesting. Yeah, it is pretty crazy. So you're playing this playing this GURPS game. So what so are you playing what are you playing as far as the genre for the GURPS?
It is a time travel game of some kind. The game master has kept that quiet, but essentially it's the Planet of the Apes pitch, where we are a crew of a spaceship and we jumped, and when we came out, we're like, what the hell is going on here? That's Earth. And oh, by the position of the stars, we've just figured out that it's like 1680. What the hell's going on? And that's pretty much where we're at. So we've spent 2 sessions post jump trying to figure out what the hell's happening.
Okay,
It's
so time travel, and you're actually dealing with more recent real world history.
well, at least now, yeah. Well, we expect to move around in time. Let me put it that way.
So I'm assuming this is this going to be a game of shenanigans, or is this a game that's going to be kind of somewhat serious?
No, it's fairly serious, but I have already threatened to space somebody, so I am the captain. And somebody was caught on video performing sabotage and claims he has no memory of it. Now we gave him some truth serum, and he still said he had no memory because I don't know how he rolled. Maybe he just made the roll. I was like, okay, fine. We'll continue this conversation in the morning in the airlock. So
yeah, holy shades of the expanse.
Slightly.
Because I think I've not played I've never really truly played GURPS, but boy, there is. I think if that would they've got a lot of really good traveler stuff for GURPS.
There's a lot of very high quality material that is sometimes difficult to incorporate into the version of Traveler that I like, which is any of them but GURPS, really. And I don't say that because I think GURPS Traveler was a bad product line, or that I dislike GURPS particularly. I just don't think there's a perfect fit between the assumptions that GURPS is built on and the assumptions that Traveler's built on. A lot of that revolves around characters. Yes, there's a random character creation system in GURPS, but it sucks. And a lot of the magic of Traveler to me comes out of that character creation process. Where you're discovering the character as you go through that process, regardless of what version it is. Whether it's Classic Traveler, that process took 5 minutes. For Mongoose Traveler, could take 2 hours. But you're discovering the character and the character's relationships as you execute that process. In GURPS, the expectation is not necessarily the reality, is that you begin the character creation process knowing all of that, and then knowing how to execute that in the system and putting the points in all the appropriate places. That to me is a fundamental tonal incompatibility between Traveler and GURPS. That said, there's excellent GURPS Traveler material. They did stuff that has literally never been, like that whole economic system in GURPS Far Trader, for example.
That's what I was going to say. That
has never been duplicated anywhere else to the same degree, or that works nearly as well. There have been attempts to do it, but they were not successful.
Okay.
That book on the nobility, GURPS Traveler Nobles, that's the best source book on that particular topic. The Third Imperium is this feudal interstellar society. How does that actually work? GURPS Traveler Nobles tells you. Otherwise, you got to piece that together from little tidbits all over the place in the 40+ year history of the product line. So there's a lot of really remarkable material there. But as a foundation for Traveler play, I don't prefer GURPS for that reason. That I own absolutely everything that they ever published for it, including the little mini mission briefing books and the deck plans and the cardboard heroes, everything. And none of it's going anywhere unless you would like to buy my duplicates of the deck plans. In which case, let me know, because I somehow have duplicates of the deck plans.
Oh, really? That's pretty amazing. Yeah, it is kind of interesting. I guess the question is, they could have made I guess it's because of the point buy system that goes by. I was saying they still could have done it random, but I think the idea is that people would come up with all sorts of different points at the end, which is probably not what people want with Traveler, or not with Traveler, but GURPS. I mean.
So there, and that's exactly it. There is a random character creator in GURPS, whether you can use it for Traveler or not. But I think the expectation of people coming into GURPS is that it's a point buy system, and I'm going to get to design the character to my exact specifications. And if that's what I wanted to do, fantastic. Then GURPS is going to make me real happy. But if I want to kind of see the magic emerge through play, and that play begins the minute we start rolling the characteristic dice for character creation, then I prefer the traveler system. This is an old school. I hate using this terminology because I believe it to so often be misapplied nowadays. But it's a very old school approach where I want to see the emergent narrative that comes out of the characters and how they interact and the random stuff that happens because of dice and tables and whatever. I think that's a super duper old school way to play and or run things that I am very much in favor of. And I wish that there wasn't such an enormous degree of tunnel vision among the self-proclaimed OSR folks about it.
I think too. I think sometimes people go into travel, and there's a person I know that's, you know, his frustration with, like, you know, a group of people roll these characters and they're just like, it could be anything. Like, there's no necessarily any logic, but that is really the intent. It's not
Yeah.
about being a mercenary company or what.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, this guy, you know, you could just, depending on, I guess, what version you're playing and what branches and where you start out. I mean, you could wind up with, you know, the people just are not combat people, and they're
Mm-hmm.
but in travel, that's not the point. Is to be solving problems through combat.
Right. And from the very beginning, there are weaknesses to that character creation system, by the way, which is exactly what you just described, where you might have a group that wants to play a mercenary company or wants to play free traders or wants to play interstellar spies. And then we've never really had really good guidelines as to what there's never been a good tool set for the referee to drive character creation in that direction. Let me put it that way. It can totally be done by fiat, but then you got to worry about overlap, right? Okay, you're all spies, so you're all taking the agent career. Depending on the rule set that we're using, is there enough differentiation inside that agent career so that you're not all the same,
Right.
right? You know, several of you rolled the same events because it's one table for the agent career, right? So that's a thing you have to think about. And for it's kind of the most traditional traveler campaign format is the Firefly format, right? Where you got a ship, you're wandering around getting into trouble, and on the ship are a assortment of random disparate characters with very different backgrounds and outlooks and skill sets, and they are not balanced between each other in any meaningful way, right?
Yeah. So, but with them, they definitely have the archetypes, and so
Mm-hmm.
that's. I suppose you could still do that. So, like, so you could probably still be right. You still have to differentiate it. So if you're to do a mercenary group, you still could, I guess, would have, like, I don't know, like the grunt, the mechanic, the
Mm-hmm.
saboteur. But I guess you're right. But still, some ways they're. And I guess we'd have to go into it that there's not going to be a lot of distinctiveness between
Well,
them.
this is why we got books in the classic Traveler era like Mercenary and High Guard and Scouts and Merchant Prince to expand on those basic careers so that not every guy in the army was just, hey, there's a guy in the army, he can shoot stuff and maybe call in artillery, and that's it. And then this other guy, my other brother Daryl, was also in the army and he can shoot stuff and he can maybe call in artillery. Um, Mercenary kind of fixes that by giving you like specific assignments. You don't just say, okay, I got a 4-year term, I roll some dice, I roll dice 3 times to see if I A, die, B, get promoted, or C, get what skill I get. In Mercenary, you would get driven into an assignment, and then that assignment had its own skill tables, and then you could have up to 4 assignments, as I recall, in your 4-year term. So it made the process take way longer. Whereas in Classic Traveler, the entire beginning to end character creation process is 5 minutes. This makes it more detailed than that. But the issue with those books then becomes, okay, I got Mercenary, covers the Marines and the Army. Well, what if I want to make a Navy character? Well, okay, we got a new book for that, High Guard. Okay, I want to be a merchant. We got Merchant Prince for that. Okay, I want to be a Scout. Okay, we got Scout for that. Then what about all the other profession or occupations in Citizens of the Imperium or careers? None of those got a similar treatment back in the classic day. So Mega Traveler then comes out and includes the 6 original careers from Classic Traveler, plus all the additional 12 careers from Citizens of the Imperium. And the original careers have this extended term system, and the other careers don't. So if you've got a bureaucrat who's one of the Citizens of the Imperium careers versus this individual in the Navy, well, the individual in the Navy is going to come out of that with more skills just because he's making more rolls.
Right.
So that became a problem that was not satisfactorily fixed by Mega Traveler. Is kind of fixed by T4 and by Mongoose Traveler First Edition. But T4 does not have like broad careers either. So that the same problem arises, right? Okay, I got 2 characters that came out of the Scouts. Are they going to be exactly the same? Well, they're not going to be exactly the same, but there's probably going to be a lot of overlap. And then that makes that puts the players under, well, how do we distinguish these characters, right? Or are they, the long lost twins, right? Which is, a thing we've seen happen. I do like Mongoose Traveler Second Edition specifically for this, because inside each career, and there's, I don't know, 15 of them, you have a series of specialties, 3 specialties, and you pick one of those sort of paths to go through the career on, and then that determines a lot of the things that end up potentially happening to you. You also have the random events, which is kind of built into the career, that hopefully you'll get random events than somebody else. But if you've got a party of 6 players all going through the Navy because you're a Navy crew, then that can become problematic, because you're still probably going to get quite a bit of overlap there. So it's there's a reason to prefer an approach like GURPS, where I don't have to worry about that. I can just I want to play Geordie LaForge versus I want to play Tasha Yar versus somebody else wants to play Jean-Luc Picard, and you just figure out how the points break down, and they're all different characters with different skill sets.
Yeah, I think it's kind of some games, I think also set just the assumption, like with I think the archetypes work, but I think the thing is, but the problem is it forces you into archetypes that may not always work. And then if it's always intending for you to have archetypes, then if you don't have those archetypes, it's kind of like with D&D. It's like, I think with 5th edition, they try to get away. My understanding is like, you almost always need to have a cleric, a fighter, and a thief, and a mage. It's like now they kind of change the classes where everybody can do their own healing to a bit, and everybody's got skills they can do certain things to a bit. And on one hand, you kind of do make it so you don't have to have a cleric or you don't have to have a thief. But then on the other hand, you also tend to create something else that's really, I don't know. I guess there's a lot of blending together, which things don't seem to be quite as unique.
So this is a good point, because this highlights the fact that the challenge that I just described with Traveler, depending on version, similar challenges are faced by D&D players and game masters. What if you have a party of 5 players and 3 of them want to be fighters? Okay, how do we distinguish that? This has been a question that one has had to ask in various editions, right? D&D has traditionally been quite poor at modeling characters from fantasy film and literature and such, for example. Could you just hand wave that? Yeah, of course you could, and people did. But it's the same kind of, does your sort of conception of the system hang together then? And is that undermining?
Just say, I'll turn on the light real quick. Okay, there we go.
Sorry about that.
No, it's me. Yeah, so go ahead. What you're saying about the modeling?
Yeah, so I mean, D&D has its own share of challenges, right? And that's not to say D&D bad, Traveler good. I'm saying that they're different. They're meant to model different things and different campaign approaches, and they are better suited to different campaign approaches, which is why I balk when I see yet another adaptation of D&D into some genre or topic that it does a bad job of modeling.
Well, I think it goes back to, and I think people talk about like emulation or simulation. I think it really comes down to like D&D really does a good, I mean, it's best at modeling D&D.
Yes, it's excellent at D&D.
Yeah.
In
And
fact,
nothing else can be D&D. I mean, it really is that, but D&D really doesn't work well for anything else.
You're going to get a vastly different experience. You might look at it and say, okay, I want to play Dungeon World or GURPS Dungeon Fantasy or whatever. Okay, so this is actually a nice little trilogy of examples here versus D&D. You're going to have a very different experience out of either of those other two games,
Right.
even though you're basically building inside the same trope set as D&D. It's up to the individual to decide which they prefer, but the fact is that I think D&D does a really good job at modeling that. Whether that's the kind of thing I want to play or not is my call or your call or whatever. But I'm less confident in the adaptability of that platform as a universal system to do other things. And that goes all the way down to basic fundamental assumptions about how that system works. It's level based, it's class based. Some games have dispensed with the classes, rather fewer have dispensed with the levels. We're stuck with these 6 ability scores that may or may not make sense depending on the context and themes that we want to explore. We've got there's a huge built-in assumption in any level system. If you, unless the game says you don't have to start at level 1, of course you don't have to start at level 1, but the assumption is always there that you're starting at level 1. What if my character, I want to be the old grizzled mercenary? Well, you're tough, you're still level 1. That's literally how it works in D&D rules as written. Did people hand wave that? Of course they did.
We never did. I don't know why when we were younger we never did.
Well, we didn't either. We didn't either as a kid. I mean, I didn't start thinking about this stuff until the 90s, right? But I was exposed pretty early to games that weren't D&D, and a lot of people haven't had that experience, right? I mean, I started playing D&D. I could date this precisely to May 5th, 1981, because that was my 10th birthday, where I got the Moldvay basic set. So I assumed that play occurred on that day. But within 3 years, probably, I had seen Traveler and Champions already. Yeah. Within another couple of years, I had seen Call of Cthulhu and RuneQuest. The RuneQuest, this was the Avalon Hill RuneQuest, actually. That was, I believe, in 1987. And it was the equivalent, I think, today of about $105. It was very expensive at the time. And nowadays, I mean, you'd be like, okay, yeah, that's what they cost. I actually had to order that because you could buy books, individual game components from Avalon Hill. You didn't have to buy the whole game. So I had to order it piece by piece over the span of about 6 months to get
build your own game.
Box set. Yeah. So, so I had seen a variety of different mechanical approaches, even, as early as like 1985. And while I didn't stop playing, I didn't ever stop playing D&D permanently, but I was certainly not high on D&D throughout the 90s, and I was a loud and no doubt totally obnoxious anti-D&D crusader back in the days of Usenet, for example. But around the time I left high school, I started steering into other RPGs. So for most of the 90s, our game of choice was RoleMaster. For most of the 2000s, our game of choice was Ars Magica, with a mostly different group at that point. And then around the 2010s was around the time I moved away, went back to school, was going to school full time and working full time, and had to give up basically gaming. But that's when I was blogging, because I could sit there for 5 minutes between, while I was waiting for the professor to show up and write 200 words. So that was my outlet for that at the time. That's a big reason why it went away, because I don't need the outlet anymore. I've got more than enough friggin' outlets around here.
Yeah, but I think because we played a lot of games too, but we never would have. I think we never would have started a character at a higher level. I don't know why that is, but we would just continue to run characters through stuff to get them up to different levels. So we have a lot of characters at different levels. I don't know why there's that blind spot. Well, why not just start a guy at 5th level?
So, interestingly, when I hooked up with the RoleMaster group, and this would have been in about 1991, I want to say from the very beginning of my involvement with that group, you didn't start at level 1 necessarily. You rolled a d4 to see what level you started at.
Oh,
So there was
really?
going to be a variety of different levels within the starting party. But yeah, I mean, there's an unstated assumption, and some folks maybe haven't thought about it, that the level system implies this kind of character progression where the characters are going to go from 0 to hero, right? And even
Yes,
if you start
yes.
at 5th level, well, you're just farther along the road to hero, right? Whereas in something like Traveler, the character's fully formed when you start quote unquote play, right? You finished with that. Maybe you have some kind of experience system that's either in the version of Traveler that you're using or that the game master has tacked in, but pretty much this is the character, right? This is not some young sprout off the Joseph Campbell potato wagon. This is a fully formed individual who could be in their 50s or 80s for all I know, if you got that lucky. That's a very different assumption, right? That the play experience is not about character power progression as far as the numbers on the character sheet are concerned. You've got to think outside that to evolve the character. And there's nothing that says the character is not going to evolve. The character will, but the numbers on the character sheet mostly stay the same, unless you get shot in the leg.
I
And
remember we played. There's a much older person running a game, and I'd ask him. He invited a bunch of us to play, and I'd ask him, what character level are we supposed to bring? Let's just bring whatever you want.
hmm.
And his idea was he would run an adventure, and the characters could be of different levels, which like blew my mind. Like you could have a 10th level and a first level, and I think about that. I mean, years later, I kind of go about it. It does kind of make sense because we tend to think of like everybody being the same, everybody progressing the same, but that doesn't necessarily make sense.
Yep. I mean, that's a very old school way to play. You have a party of 10th and 11th and 12th level characters, and remember, everybody back in the day in D&D had different experience costs to gain a level.
Yeah.
So you could have a range of levels right there. One of them gets killed. The person that player's going to make a new character, it starts at first level.
Yeah.
Right. So you got this, I'm level 9, fighter, and this. Here is Bozo, our level 1 sprout that has just walked in the door. Right. But that's got to be a kind of tough to manage, right? How do you manage that I mean, there's ways to do it, obviously, but as a referee of that game, man, what do you do? I mean, you got to figure that out.
But I think even with magic users, it's kind of interesting that the play experience being different is the magic users were like terrible at early levels, and you only would get a lot of your XP was from killing things, and so we would and we'd only give the XP to the person that killed the monster. So usually a lot of times fighters would go in and almost kill something and have the magic user run at the last minute, and throw his dart to kill it and get the XP so you get him to level up. So it creates a thing that doesn't make any narrative sense.
It doesn't, but the alternative is to actually run the experience the way the book says, which is to give experience for gold, which makes no logical sense,
right.
But it kind of makes the game work properly.
Right.
Because it makes it about getting gold. So the characters basically become slightly less murder hobo. They go to 40% murder hobo,
right,
and 60% armed brigand. Right. So and that is, I think that was intentional. I think that's why it worked that way, because you could outsmart the monster and still get the XP because you got the treasure. That was the important thing.
Yeah, you could be the thief that really is just the hobbit and who's just the joke of the party, but yet, you're the one that sneaks in and grabs the gold while everybody else keeps the dragon, distracted.
So,
Yeah.
but a lot of people, including us, didn't catch that. So we didn't give gold XP for gold because it didn't make sense. It seemed dumb. But in retrospect, it's part of the model.
Well, I think if I recall right, I may be wrong, but I think AD&D gave quite a bit of XP for the monsters, where I think the earlier versions was less XP for the monsters.
Correct. Well, so I can't speak for the pre-AD or pre-basic, I guess, D&D, but advanced D&D did in fact give XP for the monsters. But but you were gonna, I mean, just the way it would work if you followed the treasure recommendations, you were going to end up with more XP from the gold.
But what was crazy was the XP system for RoleMaster.
Ugh. So the way we did that was it was up to the player to keep track of their own XP. And even then, and we had these like elaborate XP log sheets
Yeah,
that I
this was
would
pre spreadsheet days.
Oh yeah. So but it was up to the players that even then we just ignored a lot of it. Like the we're making skill rolls successfully. We never did that. That's just, it's too much. Every time you roll the dice, you basically could gain XP. We did do the combat and the kill XP, and we did like critical XP. So it was largely combat that drove those campaigns, and that meant that we saw a lot of combat. And well, you know what happens when there's a lot of combat in RoleMaster. A
Yeah,
lot
people
of
lose
flying
things.
limbs and
Yeah.
decapitations and all that stuff.
That's
So
a real reason why we all played it.
the mortality, that's totally a factor, man. That the entertainment value in those critical tables by themselves makes RoleMaster an experience I think that everybody should have. And also, I keep making this case, and people don't believe me, is that, man, that's not a particularly, if you're talking about RoleMaster back then, you look at the standard system, it is more complicated, but second edition RoleMaster was not very complicated. Character creation took a while, but once you played, you had a number on the sheet, you roll the dice, add the number, look that up on a table, and that's it. There's just a lot of tables.
That's right. It wasn't the complexity, I think, that killed the game. It's just the time it took to, unless you're very familiar, to be cross-referencing all the time.
Yeah.
Results.
It did require optimal or near optimal organization on the part of not just the game master, but all the players too. Because we'd come with the binders. Okay, I got my sorcerer. So here's the character sheet in the front. And then I got this, here's my weapon for the weapon table that I got. Here's the critical tables for the criticals that the weapon does. Here's my spell attack tables. Here's the critical tables that are relevant to this character. So you kind of had to go in prepared, right? Or you were going to way slow the game down. There's a new edition of RoleMaster that just came out in the last few months.
Yeah, against the Dark Master.
No, not that. RoleMaster Unified. That just come out from what is now doing business as Iron Crown Enterprises.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it looks like the same version of RoleMaster that they had floating around for years in beta documents, and I was not impressed with it, so I haven't really looked into it. I have looked at Against the Dark Master though, and it's pretty spiffy.
I think, to me, if we could automate, through phones and VR and whatever, I think we could all these old games would shine so much. I mean, like RoleMaster, if you could just automate that to speed up combat, it would I think bring back the popularity of the game.
See, we always found that RoleMaster combats went very quickly because people would die, so that helped speed things along. But yeah, I mean, if you had like a really good virtual tabletop implementation of say RoleMaster, a game that's otherwise relatively complicated, that would even just automate the experience. I mean, automate that experience system.
Yeah.
That would be kind of cool.
Right? Yeah, because you just click the button. Okay, 3 points of damage, and now you're pierced through the thigh, and you're bleeding at 1 hit point around. Okay,
yeah, you took an A critical. That's another 100. Whatever, 100 XP.
Because I think damage. With our AC versus armor making either you harder to hit or absorbing damage.
Mm-hmm.
Where RoleMaster combined the two. Where you have better armor, you're easier to hit, but you take less damage.
Yes.
And that's just genius.
Yeah. They didn't go all the way with it though. And I wouldn't see all the way with it until Harnmaster, actually, which, despite the similarity in names, is not and that they're both percentile, is not particularly similar to RoleMaster. In addition, so you have concussion hits in RoleMaster. Those are functionally hit points. They go to 0, then you begin the dying sequence, which was actually in the game. But you also took specific injuries, right, based on the critical table results. You might have been hitting the leg, and you're bleeding at 3 hits per round. So you've also got, and the healing system was built around that. So yeah, we could keep pumping healing potions into you, but you're still bleeding at 3 hits a round. Somebody's got to do something about that. So you'd actually have to go find a healing spell. It wouldn't be just heal 6 points. It would be like staunch bleeding. And
Right.
you'd have to go heal that specific injury, right? But nevertheless, you also had the parallel system of hit points. So I think people never really quite got that. That you're just like a little box injury. Here's what
Right.
happened, and this is the specific thing you got to go fix. Harnmaster actually goes all the way and dispenses with the hit points. It doesn't have hit points, and you just have the injury, and then the injury has like a rating that's its penalty, its percentile penalty to actions while you're suffering from that injury. And then the healing on that can be magical, but it can also be just, the local chirurgeon, it has to tend to you to sew that up. It works on those specific injuries as well. So it's actually a really fascinating system that I really kind of hope would get more attention than it has. But because it's so tied to the Harn setting, I think a lot of people have failed to engage with it. It's got a lot of really interesting features.
Well, even Forbidden Lands, they've incorporated that sort of critical table,
Mm-hmm.
and in basically you die from injuries, not from losing.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have hit points. You have your stats that you lose. You go to 0, you're knocked out. But you can get injuries that will kill you. So they kind of did that, but in a much more simplified way, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, not a simplified. I've played for little Forbidden Lands, and I like a lot of what that system has going for it. But what I like, what got me to buy it was the whole hex crawl thing, because I love hex crawls. Hex crawls are awesome.
Yeah, I got it. I just don't like the setting.
Me neither. Not a huge fan of the setting. I don't like it tonally. I don't think it tonally hangs together very well, and I don't think it tonally makes any sense.
No.
But I think there's a lot of really good infrastructure there.
Yes.
Mechanically for
Yes.
running that kind of campaign.
Yes. I remember thinking that I got it thinking it would be low prep. And then I see the random encounters and they're not really much of anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then the cool stuff that's in town, you really got to work at. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff that's happening, but you really got to work at. It's not like, I don't know. It ends in the end. It's like, it's still a lot of work. Why not just make my own sandbox?
Right. Or use Harn, because Harn gives you all that. You just have to accumulate a great deal, decades, in fact, of material, and read it all and internalize it all.
Yes.
It's a question. I guess it's a question of demeanor, whether it's easy to read and absorb and make ready to run somebody else's prepared material, or create your own.
Right. It's kind of interesting too. It's like not to get too far off in the brambles, but like with RuneQuest, there the setting is very much tied into the mechanics. I mean, you can kind of divorce them, but that really is kind of integral. And there is a certain amount of, even like Tecumil, where a lot of other things you can just kind of wing it. So it's just a fantasy game or a sci-fi game, but wow.
So I've always considered, so RuneQuest has kind of gone back and forth on that over the years, right? I mean, the original 2 editions, which are very similar, are kind of like explicitly tied into Glorantha, but you don't really get a lot of material on Glorantha in the book. You had to buy other stuff for that. But one of the genius things about it that I think wasn't obvious to me until much later, because I was introduced to RuneQuest with 3rd edition. That's the Avalon Hill edition. RuneQuest 3rd edition kind of takes Glorantha out of it, and you got that was in its own book, and that's great. But the assumption became that you were going to be running in this sort of mythical fantasy Earth. Which they did some pretty good supplements for, by the way. But one of the interesting things that didn't occur to me until decades later, when I read some of the Icelandic sagas, and I said, the magic that's in these things is exactly the kind of magic that's in RuneQuest, where it's like they thought of these things as magic. Okay, I'm the blacksmith making the blade. I'm going to say a little prayer to, Balder or whatever. That's how RuneQuest magic works. It's a really amazing sort of historical fantasy magic modeling. And in that sense, even though I like Glorantha, I miss having RuneQuest as this generic fantasy system, and to the extent that I think I'd like to, and I've got all the versions of RuneQuest, by the way. All the mongoose the not very great mongoose versions, and the first and second edition, and the third edition stuff, and the fifth and sixth editions. I think the easiest one to build on is RuneQuest 3. And I would absolutely consider using it as a general fantasy RPG rule set. For a historical setting, or my own setting, or Harn, or whatever. Harn and my own setting and a historical setting is likely to be a Venn diagram there with an awful lot of overlap. Yeah. So I got to put this piece of paper to use after all.
Yeah. Well, I do have a hard stop, and I do think we're hitting the time space continuum.
Oh dear, the time space continuum is about to collapse.
Yeah. We don't want that to happen.
No.
Thanks, Gary, for joining me. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, I think so. Thanks for having me and putting up with my tendency to drone on for pretty much as long as I'm permitted to do so.
Until the time space continuum.
Until the time space. Yes. Until the waveform collapses, and then you got to get back to do the dishes or whatever.
Yes, exactly. Well, thanks again, Gary. I'll have to have you on again and continue on with your great work at Ardwulf's Lair.
I appreciate that. Thanks. I'll be happy to be on anytime, as long as I don't have some major catastrophe blow up that day.
You know what?
So sorry about that.
No, in fact, I got a friend that was supposed to come on yesterday, and he was a no-show. And then he texted me. He's like, "This has been a horrible day, and I'm not going to be in a state of mind." It's like, you know what? We're adults. Life is messy. It's like,
I can't even tell you about it. At some point, for about 3 months from now, I can talk about it.
Okay, that sounds good. We'll have you on in 3 months and talk about it.
Fair enough. Anytime.